Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast. This is Matt Markin, and we are at episode 107. And on today's episode, we have a wonderful panel of guests and an equally wonderful guest host, and that is Gavin Farber from the College of New Jersey. Gavin was a previous guest on the podcast all the way back in episode 20, titled Planning and Implementation. Gavin, welcome back.
Thanks, Matt. I am so excited to be back on the podcast and to be moderating this panel. Its concept is we are all practitioners that 10 plus years of experience in the world of higher ed and student success. And you're going to learn a lot of interesting information from all of these amazing practitioners. Post-podcast, please reach out to them if you'd like. Find us on LinkedIn, connect with us. Some of us might be at the annual conference. Some of us may not, but that's okay. And it'll be 7-question format. And again, hopefully they might be some questions that you as a viewer might be thinking about yourselves when it comes to your career advancement, your well-being, etc. So my first question to the panel is, what did graduate school not prepare you for? And I'm going to actually lead it off with Matt.
Thanks, Gavin. So my graduate degree, my master's degree is an MA in Career and Technical Education. And so the point of that program was providing opportunities to gain expertise and knowledge in adult learning. And it was kind of geared more so towards teachers. But as we know, advising is teaching. Graduate school helped me with the professors kind of having students engage and share their work experience and really kind of have this collaborative style that I'm sure we all use in our jobs. And definitely in this program, I was able to utilize a lot of the career theories when I work with students. But in terms of your question, in terms of like what it didn't prepare me for, like if I had a wish list, it probably would be, I wish there was more learning about like sense of belonging and building more soft skills because, you know, we use those every day in our meetings with students. But I think also I wish there was the power of finding mentors and building networks as professionals. And probably lastly, I would say, you know, we had research papers we had to do and the like for those classes in graduate school, but I really wish there was a push of how to really conduct scholarly research and why that's important in our field in higher ed. So I guess those would be those things I wish I was able to get out of grad school.
Scott, what are your thoughts on this question?
Thanks, Gavin. I had a really great professor when I was in grad school who said there's going to be one class that you're not going to get in grad school that everyone should have but is not offered, and it's called Politics and Drama. And I thought that was funny, but, you know, working in the field, it's very true, given that we work in complex, multi-layered organizations and how valuable it is to work within these organizations and see how they tick. And you can't really like learn that in the classroom. That's more like on the ground. It really showed me why it's so important to build relationships within your institution to really, besides enjoying connecting with people, grease the wheels to get things done, right? With the goal of supporting the student experience and with the goal of making, let's say, positive progress in the name of student success, right? And so that's one that has always stuck with me, politics and drama.
Thinking about my experience, it was always when you're in a higher ed program, it was always like the student affairs versus the academic affairs folks. And no one quite learned that you have to learn how to cross the bridge early on. And when you're doing your graduate assistantship, like you might be doing a GA-ship in something you will not be working in 2 to 3 years later. And so you have to be open and willing to take whatever you can get financially to help you get paid for that degree, but also keep those experiences because you're going to keep learning from what you're doing. So that's just something I thought about, how you got to be open and willing to collaborate. And they don't have classes on collaboration. They give you a book on theory and history. But I wish we had more simulations like we do in business schools. Like you go to Harvard Business Review and there's these simulations that you do of how organizations work, but they don't quite have it ready for how higher ed works unless you're reading the Birnbaum book from like the early 80s, which I think they need a reprint of. Any other thoughts on this particular question from the field?
I really thought about this question, and I will say I think this is a good plug for the K-State Master's in Advising degree, because all the things I sort of thought of, various challenges, and some of the stuff you guys talked about here today were in ways at least addressed, if not, a big portion of the focus in some of those classes. So I believe in the first class, Foundations of Academic Advising, we learned about dealing with key stakeholders and how to get buy-in and stuff like that, that at the time I had nothing to apply that to, but I do think that helped me once I finally got into those roles. There was even, an excellent class on assessment and whatnot, with the great Rich Robbins. And that was my most challenging class, but man, was that crucial in at least setting the foundation for me to eventually do pieces of assessment in my various roles. And then another kind of one-off is it actually also prepared me to do virtual advising, because I think it was in our interpersonal relations class with the Judy Huey that we actually had to do like a mock advising session. And because it was fully online, it was via Zoom with other up-and-coming advising students. So I'm sure there are some things that I'm not thinking of, but just a nice little plug for the K-State Masters in advising is they seem to touch on a lot of those things. Now, granted, very specific to becoming an advisor. So you have to know for sure that that's what you want to do when you do that program.
All right, next question. What is an example of a challenge you faced and how did you overcome it? And I want to start with Maggie on this.
Thanks, Gavin. I mean, there are a lot of challenges in higher education, and so there are a lot to choose from. But actually, since we've just had this discussion about academic advising in K-State and you have to know what you want to do, maybe the challenge is transitioning to a non-academic advising title and like what that looks like in your career. For me, it's been really wonderful, but difficult, right? Because I'm very much ingrained in the advising world, in the advising sphere, even on my campus, but that's not my title anymore. And so here and there, maybe I'm not holding the same space in the same rooms, having the same agency or expertise about advising on my particular campus outside of NACADA, in my role in NACADA. And that's been an adjustment. And I think that's an adjustment for anybody changing titles in higher ed, especially as the higher you go, the less student interaction you have, and what are we doing this for, if not for the student and the student experience? We definitely don't want to get away from that. And so it's definitely a big challenge. And the way that I address it, just to give you some feedback on how to address as you're changing titles in higher ed, is to keep that student first mentality. I want the very last thing for anybody to be able to say to me about me across campus for anybody is that Maggie puts the student first, in whatever role I'm doing, in whatever change we've made in higher education policy, in our policy on our campus, in our state policies that are not inclusive. I want everybody to be able to say that I'm putting the student first. And so as my title changes, if that's what people can say about me, then as I continue in the university, that's where I'm able to say, oh, hey, but I also have done this. I've also been an academic advisor. Let me tell you a little bit about that, and create space and agency in some other rooms where maybe we weren't considering the advisor perspective before.
Jared, what are your thoughts on this topic?
So when I first read this particular question, it was kind of interesting to look back at my own challenges going through higher education from my perspective of it. So I started dating my spouse. She completed her PhD in art education, followed her around because it was easier for me to get jobs in higher education than it was for her to get a tenure track position. So moving around to different schools was kind of an interesting thing, especially when you had no real desire. I think growing up, I had no desire to be in higher education in any stretch or any way, shape, or form. But I did not care, didn't even think I was going to college. So it was kind of a different thing for me, I think, to come in and find something that I really had a passion in doing. And so being able to find places all over that I could kind of jump to if needs be, I think was very valuable. And so I think it kind of made me a little bit flexible when it comes to being able to just kind of jump into a situation and run with it. And so it came up a lot, though. I found it kind of challenging because it's challenging and not challenging, I guess, in a way. But I've been in higher education for 15 years. This is my sixth school that I've been at. I haven't been at a place longer than 5 years. And so like it becomes a little bit kind of taxing when you're just learning new things all the time. And every school is different and every area is different and so it's kind of hard to find your footing sometimes when you don't feel as though there's been consistency within your workplace or your home life or anything along those lines to be able to kind of build upon, right? And so that was the kind of how I read that question when it came across, as like my personal challenges when it comes to this, because I mean, I think we can all relate to this though, because we all change jobs a lot now, to where, I mean, it's kind of difficult to kind of go through and pick up on the new little nuances and the new little things that you have to remember on a daily basis just to be able to function in our work. And it makes it even harder when you're constantly moving to different places, different locations, different jobs. Degrees are constantly changing. There's different rules that come in, keep getting enacted. It's just a very strange profession that we've all decided to kind of devote our lives to. And so I can see why there's a lot of burnout in a lot of ways. I can see why there's a lot of issues when it comes to being able to stay focused and keep a healthy, maintained lifestyle to where you're be able to find a lot of balance and focus in different areas. I think it's difficult. I envy everybody that I know that works within student services and has that healthy balance, because I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard to not only have the balance in your own on your own campus, but say for those that are heavily involved within NACADA, like doing that on top of your everyday work is insane. And I really respect the heck out of everybody that does that. So for me, that's the challenging thing, is trying to find that balance and trying to make it so that it's not something that controls your everyday life. So I've been rambling now forever, so I'm going to turn over to somebody else.
I often struggle to land the plane, Jared. So I totally see you. And so, yeah, I'll embark on my journey now and take the burnout torch from you. I think that's the biggest challenge I faced just a few years ago in my role. And my NACADA family was huge in helping me through that, and just empowering me that, it doesn't make me a bad advisor or a bad person that I'm struggling with this. Just for a little bit of context, I came to DePaul in 2019, and I wasn't on campus a full year before we went virtual for the pandemic. One thing to note about DePaul is we are a quarter system school, and that was my first experience with this thing that I despise called the quarter system. I didn't even know it was a thing until I got here, quite honestly. So it was that, being virtual and not really having a lot of camaraderie at work, because I just didn't really have the chance for that. And then also advising, very ambitious pre-med students that having sort of the same often discouraging conversations over and over and over again about failing general chemistry while sitting in my apartment living room. It was just such a rough time. There was just, it's hard to find joy in that, quite honestly. And two, with the quarter system, I like to point out that, the standard sort of advising interactions, whether it's just course registration, financial aid, SAP appeal meetings, probation meetings, on and on and on. A quarter system advisor is doing all of those appointments at least one more time per year than a semester counterpart. So I argue that, while my caseload was 300 or 350, whatever the math is, multiply that to see, how that actually compares to a semester caseload. And so, to make a long story short, I think the best thing I did was to express that. And any of you that know me, I still maintain I'm very positive. I like to have fun. So even if I'm going through it, I'm still having fun about that. But I just knew that was not sustainable, quite simply. And the best thing I did was definitely telling my supervisors about it. And I was in a strange role where that reported both to the advising director and also to the faculty department chairs of the primary majors I advised for. So 3 supervisors, but they were all wonderful. And I was able to very candidly speak to them about what issues I was facing in this role. And not like I'm jumping ship now. I'm not even looking for other jobs because I really like it here otherwise. But what can be done to change things? What can we do to make things a little different and more fulfilling on my end? And I was really glad that each of those supervisors were very supportive in, I guess they wanted to keep me around. So trying to give me other projects that weren't, making it so that I was just insanely busy, on top of my caseload, but things to help me derive a bit more meaning from my role. And finally, through being so expressive about that, but still maintaining some sort of personability, the neuroscience program, one of the majors I advised for, was able to, for the first time, hire a new staff position. It was kind of a new and growing department. So they came up with this idea to have someone that does both administrative work for the program, which is not a lot because it's still pretty small, but then also all the student success programming. So with my background in advising, and specifically for those students, fortunately, I was kind of an obvious choice for that. And I've been in that role now for 2 years. And I just can't tell you guys how much I love the variety in this role. And I'll land the plane there.
We'll go Scott then Amber.
Thanks, Gavin. I'll echo, talking about the ample challenges that came out of the COVID experience and how it was an exercise in taking care of yourself and also taking care of those around you, and how it was very challenging. I think I definitely learned a lot from that time. One thing that I will, pivot to is the challenge of lobbying for sustainable change at an institution. I think one thing that I learned early on, particularly when I started as an academic advisor, was I didn't know what I didn't know, so I was constantly a sponge and learning more about the institution, learning more about policies, learning more about the system. Every time we would go through a cycle of students, I could see different patterns of things happening over time. And now my role kind of encompasses both academic advising as well as like the operations of our office. So I'm kind of an interesting blend of like how are students interacting with our office, what experience do they have when they walk in, while also doing the academic advising stuff myself. And one of the things I started to see was, I'm seeing common things come up every year. We're going through a cycle, first year students are starting to register, and every year we have an issue where people freak out. They can't enroll themselves in these classes, so we have to manually override them. And my question was, well, why? Why? Because some of these people do have prerequisites, but the way it was not built in the system yet. And the thing that I learned was, okay, I can bring this up. And of course, this is working closely with my supervisor. And people would acknowledge it as important, but a lot of people at the university have a lot on their plates. So we'd go another year and the same problem would resurface. And eventually, through a lot of relationship building and a lot of learning more about the system, there was a time where there was like a restructuring, there was a change of things. Certain people left the university, certain people moved into different roles. And myself and my colleagues were like, I think it's time. Like, let's go again. We've already brought this up a few years. And so we went and brought it up, and it happened. And that whole group of students no longer had to come to us panicked for overrides. They could just enroll themselves. And so I think I learned out of that challenge that nurture your ideas, hold on to your ideas. It's not necessarily the case that if you can't solve it right now, that it will never be solvable, but you kind of have to know the universe to know when, okay, it's the time, right? It's the time to make the move. It's the not time to make the push. I think this is a good time to approach that. So that's one example for me.
I'm going to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about like the challenge I've faced personally, like in figuring out what I want to do in higher education in my career and like really forging that path. I started in advising and advised at an institution where it was a very flat structure, and realized very quickly after putting in the work and putting in the extra effort that there wasn't going to be any change coming to that in any sense of the word. And so, talking with my husband and evaluating our family situation, we made the decision that I would start applying for positions outside of my institution. And so we moved across state lines and went to another institution where I could accept a higher level position and move into an advising administration role, and did that through COVID. So that was a challenge in and of itself, but we won't go into that one. And realizing within the first 2 years of being at that new institution that it was not going to be a long-term place to live either, because there was some just differing opinions in the way we were really running administration in the advising unit. We were a centralized advising. I'd come from a decentralized structure, really missed being with a specific set population of students. And so again, started evaluating, like, is this going to be my long-term place where I stay? And making that family decision to then again move across state lines again to seek out another position that was going to better align with my personal career goals and what I wanted that was going to personally fulfill me. So I've been in my position 3 years now. I'm forging my path here. I love the work that I'm doing. I'm advising adjacent. I'm doing a lot of curriculum. So that teaching aspect of advising has really built that foundation for what I'm doing now, and understanding advising and the curriculum has really helped again in this position that I'm in as running a curriculum path for our business majors. So I think if you are not being fulfilled in your role, find the niche that is going to fulfill you and find a path to get there.
I'll make mine super short and sweet because Amber inspired me to think a little bit more about this question through like a personal lens. I went to Notre Dame twice, and both times I never really felt like a true sense of belonging, not in all spaces at least. I mean, I found corners where, I was able to talk to my art friends or my literature friends or things like that. I'm not Catholic, so the whole sense of like the Catholic social justice mission and things like that I've always grappled with that as well. And I see my own students grappling with that because it is possible to live through similar values in life and like a moral compass and not have to hold a very certain traditional identity. So I guess my biggest challenge that I'm still, I don't feel like I necessarily overcame, but keeps me on my own campus as an alumni and as an academic advisor. And I've been working in, over 20 years at Notre Dame. So I see that in my own students, and I'm really honest about that being my own experience. My mom was a professor there. So this idea of like, oh, maybe they just admitted me because, I had a connection or something like that. So like these ideas like an imposter syndrome or a sense of belonging, I think we have the responsibility to be honest about our own, challenges that we face in these settings that our students are also facing. So I'll leave it at that.
So can I just say, throw something back on there, Jen, what Leonor just said? So I think that cut me off, Gavin, if you need to, by all means. So I think that one of the things too that is really important to keep in mind, I think everybody's kind of touched on a little bit, is kind of those institutional differences that exist everywhere that you go, right? So like navigating those on our own end is difficult sometimes, let alone how difficult it must be for the students that we serve is insane to think about. So like one of the schools that we went to, and Amber, I think that this touches very much on what you had mentioned. After leaving the University of Arizona, we went to Fayetteville State University in Charlotte, Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I was there for a year. That was the strangest school I'd ever been to as far as the structure of how things were set up for students to be able to get anything approved as far as substitutions or anything. It's almost like there was a roadblock set in place at every single spot that we hit. And for me, coming from a place that was so loose as far as the U of A is incredibly loose as far as like how we would go through and process different things, process different transaction substitution requests, waivers, things along those lines, to go to something that is so rigidly structured and seemingly for no reason outside of throwing that invisible barrier there, made it really difficult to be able to even find happiness there as an employee, let alone like if you were to think about it as a student, to be able to kind of navigate those waters. They may have been used to it, but me, I was miserable coming into it. So like that was a huge challenge for me, just to see this isn't going to work. This isn't going to be a place that I'm going to be able to find long-term happiness. And it wasn't. We were there for a year and then decided, hey, we got to get the hell out of here and go back to Arizona. But it was such a weird thing to be able to kind of see that from my side of things, and then kind of try to put yourself back into the student side of it. Because like I mentioned earlier, I had zero desire to go into higher education as a career. My undergraduate was in television and film production. So I had these visions of grandeur of working on sets my entire life until I got doing that and realized that it was the worst thing I possibly could have gone into, because I was miserable doing that. This, I'm happy. That I was miserable. So but to see it now, even though I had been working in higher ed for 8 years at the time, like to see it, how frustrated I was getting, I couldn't imagine how frustrated like students were getting that have gone through that. And I think that that's extremely challenging to kind of see how good it can be in some locations and how bad it can be in other locations. It just depends on the leadership that's already there, the rules that are established, the support that you have that exists there. Because I think that's a big thing. I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to stay in working in higher education is because I made a lot of really good friends through my work in Nakata to be able to kind of rely on when times get really tough and when I don't have answers to the questions that I have. And I think that that's really important to have that structure on the back end to be able to handle some of those things.
So our third question kind of leads into the second question. So I think we've kind of answered it, but it talks about like what strategies we might have for working in what we would call like the new landscape of higher ed. I know we've kind of covered that a little bit, but if anyone else has any thoughts on that particular question, jump in, because I think we've done a beautiful job of like turning negatives into positives, because that's sort of what we do in higher ed. We're solution seekers, so we take a challenge and make it better, or just put the puzzle pieces back together in a different format that we never thought of before. So I know, Maggie, you were on this question, and Matt were on it as well. So both of you jump in.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've talked a lot about strategies already that would, like being transparent, like Leonor said. Having that support, like several people have said, coming to your supervisors. But I definitely want to continue to plug like proactive advocacy for yourself and your students. I think because my title has changed several times, there are days that I'm like, hey, wait, I see something happening on campus and I'm thinking maybe we should ask those academic advisors what they think about this. Maybe we should be asking the student affairs professionals, when different things are happening on campus, and I think, why did they decide to do it that way? Or things like that. I know Jared mentioned a little bit about structure too. And so, go ahead and insert yourselves in those rooms and in those conversations. Like, I think it's really important that we speak up on behalf of each other and on behalf of the students. I think that people in the higher education landscape aren't thinking necessarily the way we think, because advisors, especially given different populations and sizes, are used to having to be all things for all people. And that's not okay, right? That's all about burnout and contributes to the things. And there are lots of people who are professionals that are able to help the student. We shouldn't be all things to all people. But I think at some point, maybe that mentality was part of what we were doing or the way we were trained initially. Because you felt like you had to do those things for the student or help that student in that way. And I think that that's a mentality that you can flip and walk into a room and say, listen, Amber, you and I have never met, but you're doing these great things. I want to share that with others. And here are some thoughts that I have, having been in that situation before. I think we have to be ready for that. But I don't think you should go in half-cocked to those situations, right? I'm not ever going to walk into an admin meeting with anybody who holds purse strings or sway or anything like that I don't have quantitative and qualitative data. I think that is a strategy you should be using always. I think when you can walk into the provost's office and say, hey, I know this works, and the reason I know this works is because these students have said this, and here are the things that they've said, I think you have to be prepared to do those things, to have that data, to advocate for yourself, and just to keep those networks that everybody's been talking about creating. If we're creating this change culture, this culture of celebration and inclusivity, that has to start with like standing up and being present, right? That has to start with these transparent conversations, these advocacy conversations. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm ready to fight. Like, I want to throw down with you and be like, hey, you know what? We could be better, do a better job, because education is changing all the time and not always for the better, and certainly not financially for the better. And so what is the value that we're truly giving to these students that matter, and to these professionals like yourselves that are like taking this home at night and worried about it and thinking to themselves, like Jared is saying, if I feel this way, how does my student feel? So I don't know. I guess my strategy is like, document everything, use the data, celebrate each other, and then throw on the boxing gloves and let's go.
Let me jump in there with you on that fight. I feel like we forget, like the elephant in the room is that it's actually really good that the landscape of education has changed. Yeah, we're hitting roadblocks here and there, but the project of education, historically, globally, has been created and powered by and for the elite. So, in the U.S., what this equates to is education system that has been mostly prioritized, by white, wealthy males. I identify as Hispanic, female. I'm a single mother, scholar practitioner. I want to say, like, I'm not just grateful to like just witness kind of these changes that are happening, but I'm like purposely participating, whether you call that like a fight or whatever you may call it. But I'm a participant in this changing demographics on our campuses. And this matters on the way that we, who we advise, how we're advising. So in short, I think it's important that we acknowledge our histories. And before we can even begin to honor and appreciate this more justly integrated future in higher ed. So I think this might have already been said a little bit, like this Maggie's student first mentality. I like that. But, I don't know how else to explain it, but I've always just advised from the heart. I just feel like this is very heart-centered work. We're humans, we're vulnerable. If that's not at the center of everything that we do, I think that we need to push the reset button or something. So I've always been in the spaces where people are trying to empower and sustain identities on campus, on our campuses that have been historically marginalized. Questioning everything around us has pros and cons to it, right? We're not going to make change without those questions, but we also end up being the ones that are like the fingers being pointed at or whatnot. So
I'm going to hop in real quick just to piggyback off of both Leonor and Maggie, because I think one of the things that I've learned about how to really navigate the changing landscape is that you have to be really intentional with how you bring the data and the metrics and how you have the conversations. And you really have to have like that time to have understood the context before you start recommending change. And you can see that immediately and you can live with it. And sometimes you have to just bite your tongue because you really have to work to build your relationships, build the trust, and then have the data to back up what you're asking for. But something I always tell my students is the answer is always no unless you ask. And so as long as you have that data and your metrics and you have the relationships and you go and ask the question with all of that supportive information, you're very rarely going to be able to be told no because you have what you need to build your case. And so while we want to fight for change, you just have to be really cognizant of how you do that in a way that is successful to be successful.
Yeah, I think to add on, I agree with 100% with what everyone has said on this. And yeah, it really, a lot of it is how you ask, but also who you ask, when you ask. So timing is everything. But when I thought of this question, it's like change happens no matter what. And not all change is good. And sometimes you don't find out about it until that change actually happens. And then you can actually look back and be like, oh, this wasn't a good decision. But it's also where we're at on the hierarchy. Sometimes these changes happen and we're not in that room. And it's like you just now have to deal with it. But I guess the best advice that I've ever received when change happens is someone once said, like, sometimes in life, you have to do things you don't like to do, but you have to love why you're doing it. And so whether it's like what gets you through the day, helping students succeed, providing, for your family, whatever it might be, but ultimately sometimes the change might be temporary. And so sometimes like that might help you get through in the short term. So you can eventually address things in the long term. But there was something Melinda Anderson said in one of the previous podcast episodes. And she was talking about like, if I'm the same person that I was last year, then something went horribly wrong. So sometimes like these fires or challenges that we're in, sometimes they really help to forge us to be stronger and we can be the most creative during those times. And sometimes, you need that pressure to make diamonds.
We're going to flip to another area. The question I waited 5 years through different panels to ask a question like this because again, in higher ed, we do our work and then sometimes we keep personal away from professional. But I often asked, and it was a great question we did last year, how do you balance your work life and your family lives? I didn't realize last year when I did a panel, I had all parents on a panel for 10 plus years. And it was something organically that they came up with as a question. So how do you balance your personal lives with your work lives? And I think, Leonor, we're going to jump on with you first, and then anyone else who wants to come in.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a perfect recipe. There's no miracle advice that I can give. I feel like we all have a little, experience to share here about how we each, find some balance. I've heard different people on this panel already talk about like when things are added on to our already full plate, like what do we do about that situation? That happens a lot in academic spaces. In grad school, I found myself to be the only young parent in my program dealing with issues like paying for childhood or childcare or having to, show up to teach classes. I was teaching Spanish language classes with like a sick child at home or something like that. But I think for me personally, the academic jobs I found on campus, thankfully, I've had a good number of supervisors who also have families and kind of wanted to build or at least talk about centering, our own well-being in order to be there, right? Like giving ourselves oxygen before we can help others kind of is important to think about. Also, I feel like even though we've all went through a lot of trauma during COVID, there was a little bit of a silver lining about how we can efficiently and effectively work from home. And like, you can trust that we will get our job done, even if we're working from home one day. I'm actually working from home right now to do this podcast. So, those kinds of like, do you mind if I do this? And a lot of the times, I'm thankful to get those answers because we've shown over those years that it is possible to happen. Let's see. I think another thing, maybe the last thing I'll say about this is we should be role models we need to practice what we preach to our students, right? So I find myself time and time again telling my students to like ask for help. Like we need to normalize this finding and seeking support. But if we're not doing it ourselves or people don't see we're doing it like behind the scenes or we're not like, there's not an open system in the workplace that we can model that, it's a little bit like, we're not fully being transparent about everyone's needs. So building that culture of care in the workplace, starting with ourselves.
I can jump in on this one too, Gavin. And I would love to get anybody's assistance on this one because I definitely, like a lot of us, struggle with this particular portion of it. I mentioned earlier my spouse. She worked in higher education as a professor for a while. Stopped doing that, and I convinced her to apply for a job as a academic advisor as well. So now she works at the same institution I work at, and so. Usually when we get home, it's another 2 hours of conversation about work on top of the work that we've already done throughout the day. And so then stupidly you have your emails and work chat set up to where they come to your phone now. Hopefully a lot of you don't do that, but I stupidly do. And I feel like I'm there working or talking about work majority of my awake day. And I don't understand how that's healthy in the long run. And I know it's not healthy in the long run. And there are areas where I feel like I need to be able to kind of break that up a little bit more than I do. So I would say that like finding that balance is really difficult. I try to go to the gym every morning before work, try to get my mind set, get in a positive place before I go in. And I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it. Like a lot of it is strategy talk, like to be able to kind of like work through different problems, difficult issues that come up and things along those lines. But then again, it's not really what I prefer to be doing with my time away from the office, right? So like, and I think that a lot of us are that same way. And so being able to ensure that we take that time, and I'm saying this because I don't, so hopefully other people are listening to this and learning from my mistakes on this, but taking that time away from the office once you leave to be able to, unless it's an absolute 1000% priority, they cannot wait until the morning, leave it there. Definitely also take vacation, take your time. I'm notorious for that too. I think I just took that first vacation that we've taken in 2 years, and it's a lot. The definitely don't learn from what I'm doing right now. So I think that's finding balance is something I definitely need to continue to work on. I think a lot of us do too. Hopefully a lot of you have better tips than that, but definitely do something other than that.
So I kind of want to jump in here because I'm like Jared, like I'm not great at this, y'all. I find those memes that say things like, I have this anxiety and I know I shouldn't worry about it, but then I'll worry that no one else is worrying about it. So who's going to worry as well as I worry, kind of a thing. Like that's where I am. I will say though, that I am proud, and like any step you're taking, so I'm saying this to you, Jared, any step that you're taking in the right direction is a positive step, right? Like growth is a process. So we're going to celebrate every victory, even if your work-life balance, like mine, is not great. A victory is a victory. I have a graduating senior in high school this year, and I have taken more time this year to spend with her and to, visit different universities with her than I ever have before. And like, she has a long memory. Like when I was getting my master's, she was little, but now that I'm getting my doctorate, she's like, gosh, you're always busy. You're always doing this. Like she is aware. And so I try and be intentional with the time that I have with her, because we are like 250 days and my baby is not gone, but like graduating, and it's hard for me. What I will say that I think everybody has hit on at some point is finding your people on campus that get it, that creating that network. I'm so fortunate that my boss, Dr. Jessica Spott, she wrote her dissertation on mother scholars. And so like she gets it. She's like, hey, you don't even know the value, Maggie, that you contribute because you're a mom in higher education, like because you're having to do more than your normal role as a mother. And like just to know that somebody is seeing you that way, to feel seen that way, has influenced like how intentional I am with Hannah, because I know that this is it. And so I'm saying to those of you who suck at this, like I suck at this, I'm saying this to you, like, as I count down, the people that do have great advice on work-life balance, please follow it and be more intentional so that you're not like freaking out like I am, that you're about to lose time with your family, that things are changing or anything like that, or like you're not in the health mentally or physically that you want to be. Like I'm definitely an example of what not to do, but I hope that spurs you to what to do.
I just want to add something too. I apologize. Again, everybody else join in. I think that one of the things too that kind of makes it difficult for a lot of us is because of the way that higher ed changes, and one of the schools we were at was Emporia State University in Kansas there for 4 years, and they just completely went through and gutted a lot of how they do their higher education, as we know there. So like if you've read through any of the stories that are coming out of that particular university, it's scary. And so I think that like one of the things that kind of like pushes that unhealthy balance between your work and your family, or your work and your outside of work life, is the fact that I think a lot of us feel as though we have to continually be in a job interview. It's almost like you're interviewing for your own job constantly, because you have to justify the reasons that you're taking up the space that you're taking. And I don't know if anybody else has ever felt like this, or if it's just because I've moved around a lot, but this is how you feel constantly. Like you have to constantly be proving yourself as the person that can be depended on for certain things, which causes this very unhealthy balance that exists with, I think, a lot of us, whether or not we want to admit it. I think it's there, and it's scary, and it's I wish that wasn't the feeling that is always persisted, and I think that a lot of that goes back to the way you're raised and all that type of stuff too. That if you had unhealthy, like, not a lot of stability there at home, that makes it really difficult to not have that mindset too. And I know we all have different mindsets when it comes to like how we handle those particular things, but I think that makes it kind of, everything's all kind of combined and a very scary thing sometimes. And so I think a lot of therapy is getting pulled out of me right now. So enjoy that, everybody. Appreciate it.
I mean, can we say something too about how the higher education system isn't setting us up to have great well-being and personal care, right? Like, yeah. I don't care about your pizza party. I care about your compensation and your time off. And like, how are you helping me develop my sense of well-being and personal care in higher education? Like, that is a systemic problem that not everybody has. I mean, I have friends who have left higher education that are thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, this is such better mentality for me in my health, physically, psychologically, emotionally, because in higher education, I don't know that we're very good at like saying, hey, we care about you holistically. Yes, students, but maybe not professionals,
And I'll just piggyback on that, Maggie, I think that as you have the opportunity to advance in higher education, that it's even more important that you are the advocate and you are the person calling out the expectations for working more than what we're getting paid for having job descriptions that have more than 40 hours worth of work built into them, and really being the person. I know that that's something that I really value, for even advocating for myself, but advocating for my staff and advocating for the other teams that are in my area. And it really does go a long way. And somebody has to voice it. And so if you can be that person to voice it, be that person.
So something I'm interested in now is, since we've kind of been talking a lot about well-being and our tips and our strategies, I was just going to ask in general, what else are you doing to help out your overall well-being? What's something you love to do? What's something you've discovered over the last couple of years to help you unplug or de-stress or get away from advising land for a little bit?
I built a pottery studio. I'm an artist, and I've always been an artist. And, there's a lot of art in advising that we do. But I'm still trying to figure out the connection, the zen of pottery and the zen of art, of advising. So I'm working on that. But yeah, I mean, it took a lot of baby steps and a lot of like, oh, I'm saving a little bit here, I'm saving a little bit there, but building my home at the same time as building my career, kind of like we have to pay attention to all of these things that are part of our identity of life, right? So, and time, we only have so much time for everything. And I have to sleep, which I'm not that great at. So, like having my own, choosing a home where the laundry room was big enough to like slowly but surely, like, put a pottery wheel in there or whatnot. It's been a little bit of my saving grace and saving my soul.
I can jump in real quick. I think for myself, so I used to work in advertising. So I was in corporate before I segued into education. And I think that being in both environments has given me a lot of perspective about let's just say like the pros and cons of any type of environment that you could work in or be in. And one of the things that I try to focus on as much as I can is my locus of control. Like, what am I able to influence? What am I able to control? And I'm obviously, as I said before, part of my role is operations. What are systems things that I could implement or suggest or create to not only benefit myself, but maybe benefit my team? So like all boats are rising from a well-being standpoint. Examples for me, over time, I tried to identify for myself what areas I wanted to, outside of work, really focus on. So once a week, I go to a therapist. I'm a big fan of therapy. Yay, mental health. I also once a week work out with a personal trainer. I think that this took me a while to like carve out and pre-plan and think about how to finance it and when is it going to work and how is it going to work. But I think that those things for me have helped give me a good balance and help give me different concrete markers of like, you got to stop working now because you got to go. Someone's waiting on you, right? I think that piece, plus looking at ways for my team that I can try to help create areas of balance and well-being for people, has been really valuable for me. So rewind a bunch of years ago, our structure was kind of different in our office. My boss is such a wonderful model of what it is to push other people out in front, look for opportunities for those people, have high standards for them, but also think about the holistic, what's going on with the person and support them. And so I took a lot from learning from her and said, okay, what can I look about the way we work? Like, we don't have admin holds on certain times, particularly on high traffic times. During this time of year when a lot of students tend to walk in or now Zoom in, we only had like 1 or 2 advisors staffing those drop-ins. Why don't we have the whole team blocked for that time? And so like over time, looking for little things, they may seem little, but I feel like I've learned that the little things are the big things. So looking for opportunities to try to use your influence to help other people have better well-being and balance.
So Jaimie told me this a year or 2 ago, was delete my email app on my phone, which I didn't end up doing. But I will say, Jaimie, you'll be happy. I turned off my notifications on my phone when I get those emails. I do occasionally still check it, but I don't answer any emails over the weekend. I can save that for when I get to work the following week. So I will say that has helped. So thank you, Jaimie, for that. The other thing is I'm usually an early bird, so I get to work a little bit early, and then I use that as an opportunity. I used to use it as an opportunity, like, well, let me get caught up on everything, and it was just work. And I was like, well, if I'm getting to work early, do I necessarily have to start work? And the answer is no. I might still get caught up on things maybe I didn't get done the previous week, but I do carve out like 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, depending on how early I get to work, to just read something that's non-work related or non-advising related. So right now I'm making it through Patrick Stewart's autobiography, which is pretty amazing for any Trekkies and X-Men fans out there. The other thing I do is I don't volunteer as much as I used to, like volunteer myself for extra projects. One of my previous supervisors once shared, like, never say yes to something unless you have all the information. And that has helped a lot. So sometimes I'll say no, or give me more info first, and then I can make a decision. But, you know, I'm getting up in age, I'm getting older, so I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So I don't say yes to everything, take my time. And if there is a new responsibility or a priority that has to get done, you don't necessarily have to be the sole person to do it. Sometimes you can always ask, can we tag team it together with someone? And then that way you're not 100% solely doing that project by yourself.
So I want to jump in here on the phone, email, all the things, because my boss did write that dissertation on Mother Scholars. And so sometimes she'll send me a message at like 3 a.m, right? Because she has an infant. And that's when she's up and can knock some things out. But we have it on our email signatures, I think, and we're very good about, hey, these are the hours that I'm keeping. I know that those are not the hours that you keep. And like, so you know, the delayed messaging has become such a bestie for all of us, like, because I know this in this moment and I need to send it before I forget it. But to go to something that Matt said earlier, and I think that you were talking about, Melinda, when you said it, about just remembering the why you're doing this when difficult things are changing. That helps my holistic well-being a lot. And I keep a kudos folder, y'all, like, of students that have said, hey, I couldn't have done this without you, or like parents that have sent messages that are like, oh my gosh, this is our first time that we were ever able to visit campus, is graduation, and you know, our students said that you were so impactful to them. Like, I keep track of all of that because it matters so much to what we're doing. And so, like, well-being wise, I'm not doing great at maybe working out, or I am reading books like Matt, but probably not well, like not getting through all the things. But I feel like keeping the kudos file, being able to look back at all of that and really like remember, especially in those big periods of burnout. And then separate from that, I've been fortunate that I plan our like staff retreat kind of stuff. And so that gives me just such empowerment and such fulfillment to be able to say, hey, let me celebrate y'all and let's do some like innovative strategic planning and retreat separate from everything that we do and like really take some time. And that for me is fun. That for me is amazing. So maybe finding fun projects would be my advice, and then keep a kudos file.
I have a mantra from the great show Parks and Recreation: treat yourself. Never watched it when it was on. Somehow you watch these shows. Many of you know I selfishly dye my hair whenever I'm having a breakdown. Amber tells me don't be blonde. I follow Amber's hair advice. That's why I'm a redhead now. Amber, you are my hair guru. But I had to learn how to treat yourself. I had to learn after 5 years at my last job how to call out sick and take a mental health day. People all around me were like, I take mental health. That was never a policy in my last office. In my new work, they tell you, oh, your sick time is when you go to the doctor. You take your mental health, and it's different at every institution that you're at. So it's almost like playing stupid when you're in the new job of like, what do your policies look like? Is it all PTO? Is it all in one bank of your vacation and sick? And that use it or lose it policy of like, you really got to use that time, because if you lose it, then you're restarting that time up. So I'll be honest, I left my last job with over 124, it was like 120 sick days that you can't get the money for, but I had 4 or 5 vacation days that I was like, well, I will work the 4 weeks to get that money because I'm not going to do the 2 weeks notice. I also joked that it took me 4 weeks to clean out the last office. So you needed that time just to like clean everything up. So yeah, so treat yourself is my little mantra. So our last 2 questions I think are kind of a cool compound notion of like this concept of like the greatest lessons that we've learned in our careers. So we'll go that route. And then our last question will focus on where we see ourselves in the next 5 to 10 years. Anyone can just jump in here just because, again, we've given a lot of great nuggets of wisdom, but keep on sharing your wisdom, y'all, please.
I can jump in to start this one. I think personally, the greatest lesson I've learned is really find people at your institution, like-minded individuals that want the same things that you want, whether it be progression at your own school regarding different policies, procedures, moving things in the right direction, something along those lines to where you have somebody that you can go to and confide in, work with, work towards these goals. Because I think that makes it really hard if you don't have anybody at your school that has the same mindset that you do. So like if you don't find somebody there that you know that you can count on every day, all the time, to be able to say, hey, I'm having this issue. How do we resolve it? And how do we work forward and move forward and progress and grow, as opposed to just fall back into the same mindset and mentality that has always existed there. So I mean, like I mentioned earlier, this is my 6th school. I hate the concept of when you go in somewhere and all you hear is, oh, that's just the way it is. I cannot stand that. It drives me nuts. You need to find people that have that same passion and desire to move things forward in some way. It might not be perfect, even when you do move it forward an inch, but still it's something there that exists that improves the process, improves the procedure. Like I'm lucky right now, the school that I'm at, and this, one of the reasons I want to come back here is because like I know how this community is that we're in now. And the people that I work with are they're so wonderful as far as the desire to move things forward and desire to be there and help each other nurture that environment is really positive thing that we have going on here. And I think that that's something that really helps to be able to have somebody that you can go to all the time to be able to help you stay in the right mindset, because I think that's a big thing too, is when we have that burnout, because we all get it. We all will get burnout at some point. If you haven't had it before, congratulations, it will come. So just be prepared for that. But like, as long as you have a good support group, I think that that's really important. Right now, I'm very lucky because of like my direct supervisors, my coworkers, all of the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis are very positive people to be around, and I enjoy working with them. because it allows me to be able to kind of try to work on things to make things better than they were before you were there. And so, I mean, even if that's something that's already been working on, as long as you can come in and kind of add to it, I think it's beneficial. And so I think that that's the greatest lesson that I can say to somebody is to find people that you want to be working with. And if it's not even at your institution, if you have somebody that, like through Nakata, I've met with so many wonderful people that have that same like desire to want to be better for themselves, and not only for themselves, but then that helps everyone around you, helps your institution, it helps the association. All those things are all work together really well. And I think you just need to find people that are like-minded and want to move forward and progress and grow. And so I think that that's the biggest thing that I can probably say to somebody that's coming up into advisement.
That's great, Jared. And I would like to jump off of just how important those interpersonal relations are. And ideally you find like-minded people, but if nothing else, establishing good rapport with those people who maybe do have some differences from you. I learned early on here, I got off to a bad start because I encountered a situation with a student that I thought there was a discrepancy, and I thought I was the only one who realized it. I didn't ask questions first. And I emailed this person, and tone can get lost over email. It's kind of one of the bigger things that I learned here. And, just kind of pointing out that here's a situation. I think this is what we need to do for this student. Mind you, I had not yet met the person I was emailing. I was just like, hey, I'm new here. There's this problem we need to fix, right? And I was told it via email, ask questions first so you don't look stupid. So it was not the warmest welcome. I don't agree with that approach. But what I learned from that, in addition to asking some questions, the main thing I learned was to establish these relationships with people and actually go talk to them in person. And I'm just such a big advocate of getting outside of my office and meeting other people. One thing that here in our college they did maybe 2 years ago, and they stopped doing, I think the person that managed it got busy, but they started doing happy hours here on campus, like at the end of the workday, like once a month, just for the College of Science and Health. And I will tell you, I love to have a good drink, but the main thing I got out of that was meeting some people in other offices and spaces that I otherwise wouldn't have met. And from there, the incredible collaborations that have come and the change that we have been able to affect, I just don't know that it would have happened on the same timeline, if at all, or with such fun and pleasantries, if I had initiated, or if any of us had initiated those things via email. So while you can't have great relationships maybe with everyone or always find like-minded people, keeping in mind that, email isn't, while it's necessary, if you can get up and go find and talk to these people or meet them maybe in other casual settings, I think it just, takes you much, much further than just shooting that email off in the dark. Hey, you've never met me. Let's try to work on this thing together. No matter how well-intentioned you are, or no matter how ignorant you might be to, the culture and questions you should have asked first. Either way, sort of getting out there and making those connections with people on both sides of the fence, sort of, I think is just so crucial. And then taking it a step from there in terms of wellness is certainly, these are people to go off and have our own happy hours with, right? And have real good times outside of work. So big lesson to learn is that, I don't know everything, and I certainly don't claim to. And maybe it's better if I state my claim in person in a nice, one-on-one, and get that rapport going.
I have a couple. Professionally, I think maybe the biggest lesson I've learned is to be adaptable. I think somebody said, it might have been Scott, it might have been Matt, like change is inevitable. Change is always going to happen, good or bad. And so being able to adapt and take what you know to be true, your campus resources, your passion, like all of your experience, and just see how that relates in every next step and every change. I mean, that's value added always. That's and so just being able to adapt and connect. And then I think professionally also, I want to be the mentor that I needed. And so, and I think that you need to know that sometimes you don't even realize that you're mentoring someone, but people are taking notice of the stuff that you're doing, of the things that you're saying. It's impactful. And so, try and be the mentor that you needed, because I have a whole list of things I wish I had known, when I started my career more than 10 years ago. And I want to impart that. I'm always like, my biggest thing is I'm always going to put the student first, no matter what. Put the student first. That is the big thing, because everything else will fall in line. And I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn looking at like corporate messaging and change culture and what that looks like in the corporate world. And it's all about, put your people first, put your staff first. And I feel like if we have that mentality about the student, everything is going to fall into place, regardless of how change is happening in higher education and things are evolving. If your purpose is the students, then put them first, and that makes just like logical sense to me. And I don't understand why it's not a bigger message. But then personally, the biggest lesson I feel like is I want everyone that I know who is amazing, and that's pretty much everybody I know is amazing. I want them to meet all the other people who are amazing. Like my personal goal is for all my amazing friends to know all my other amazing friends. And so if I can connect someone in some way, if Jaimie didn't know Amber, but I was a mutual friend between them, now I want them to know each other. And I think like the personal fulfillment you get from connecting other people so that we can create change personally and professionally is just the biggest takeaway you can have. It might not benefit me, and that's what you should take away from this. Like connecting Matt and Gavin might not benefit me personally, but my personal goal is like, if they know each other, then I've done my job, because they're amazing people. So those are my lessons.
Yeah, I love those. And if I can put my 2 cents with this, as you can probably tell, I'm a quote person. So like the one thing when I thought of this question was like, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you deal with it. And the reason I say that is like with all the changes that happen, all the different personalities, all the different people in different departments that we have to work with. And so sometimes you really have to advocate for yourself, like others have said. And sometimes if you have a suggestion, you have an idea, sometimes you got to sell that idea. And a lot of times you have to think about what's in it and how can you sell it, what's in it for the other person, the other department, your higher ups, that they might be more inclined to approve and let you go with your idea. But we always have suggestions, always push your ideas. And that definitely allows you to expand your network and collaborate, like others have said. Maybe it leads to more solutions or other solutions you haven't thought about, more suggestions, and it allows you to keep learning as well. So, a lot of this has taught me that you can't always get what you want, but sometimes timing is everything and you can always improve yourself and there's always opportunities around. And Jaimie was talking about emails, so sometimes you might send an email multiple times and someone doesn't answer it. It's amazing if you get out of your office, sometimes you run into that person and they're like, oh yeah, I need to email you back and respond. But sometimes don't be in your office. If you can schedule time to just go to the coffee shop on campus or somewhere, it's amazing the people you run into that you need to collaborate with. And now you have that opportunity that you didn't plan.
I'll throw in really quick. I think I said it before, but little things a lot of times are big things. And particularly when we're taking into account, our students' well-being, our well-being, something that seems little like a pause or silence or reflection or questioning in the midst of all this workload, all these emails, all the students in front of you. Sometimes I've learned that taking a minute to pause and maybe not responding to that email until 2 or 3 days later, sometimes problems resolve themselves. Other times you're able to go and use that opportunity to kind of reflect upon a bigger issue, a bigger systemic issue, and kind of gather your community around you who could influence change to actually move that forward. But none of that is possible if we're running at 1,000,000 miles an hour without a pause. Like you need to give yourself the chance to question, the chance to step back, to look at the bigger picture. So I think that little things are big things. And one of those little things is silence, pause, reflection.
With our remaining time, where do we all see ourselves? We going to be back here in 10 years, y'all?
I can start this one. So I have always hated is probably not even loathed. I don't know what other word I can use for admit like the evaluation periods where they're like, set your 3 to 5 year goals. I am let's see where the world's going to take me in 3 to 5 years kind of person. And I'm a firm believer in not closing doors or setting paths that you never know what's going to come down the road and shift. So I have no idea where I'm going to be in 3 to 5 years, Gavin. I'm going to be wherever the wind takes me and wherever life takes me. And as long as I am doing a position that I feel personally fulfilled in, I'm around colleagues that I feel supported by, and I enjoy what I'm doing, then I know I'm going to be in the right place.
I would love to just jump right in off of that. I completely agree with Amber. Maybe 10 years ago in my career, or maybe even 5 years ago, I think, it's like, well, you be an advisor for a while until you get moved up and stuff. And maybe you're a director at some point and so on. And I have definitely realized that there are elements of that aren't attractive to me. And just being comfortable in the position I am, enjoying the work that I do, getting fulfillment out of it, having some autonomy to be able to make things my own and feel proud of them. And then just being surrounded by wonderful people. That was a huge thing for me when I was considering transitioning from my technical advising role to this role just serving the neuro program was, oh, thank goodness, at least I get to stay with a lot of the wonderful people that I already love working with in terms of staff, faculty, and some of our great students. So budget permitting, if the university continues to see this position as being valuable, I don't see myself leaving it anytime soon. But if something else neat comes along in the same vein and they think that'd be good for me, well, who am I to turn that down? So wherever the wind takes me, as long as those winds are pleasant.
I'm with everybody else. I don't see that kind of conducive thinking is like, where will we be in 5 to 10 years? I'm not a fan of that interview question or anything like that. I do want to know, what will we be doing still and what will we have addressed? What does our growth look like? And I think that those are better questions. I still want to be speaking the names of others in rooms where they need to be heard and finding ways to, give them agency so that I don't have to speak for them, so that they can speak for themselves. I still want to be fighting the good fight and all of those things, but I don't want to be doing certain, bad habits like well-being that we talked about earlier. Like, I don't want to be in the same spot with with my personal well-being and work-life balance. I think the question is about, what does growth look like for you from here on out? And I think that that's where we should, start from. That wasn't an indictment on your question, though, Gavin, I promise.
No, I loved it. I wrote it down in the notes. Any final thoughts on that right now?
No, I enjoyed this thoroughly. I think we should come back for a part 2, So.
Absolutely. I think we could talk for hours and hours. So I guess my final thought would be, if you like listening to this episode, connect with us. Matt, Jaimie, Scott, Maggie, Jared, Amber, Leonor, 8 perspectives you've learned today. There's so many of us at that level of mid-career, over 10 years. Please find us. Many of us are at the annual conference this year. We're on LinkedIn. We'll all be around in some format. But I thank you all for listening to this episode of Adventures in Advising 107. And thank you all for being a part of today's panel. I've learned a lot from y'all. And again, continue the conversations. If we stop the conversations, we do not move forward in the profession. So thank you for being a part of today's episode.